Hello, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our ninth conversation on agroecology. Today, we will be diving into advancing agroecological transitions. How do we go from specific tools to a conceptual framework for monitoring this transition? My name is Taru Sandén. I come from the Austrian Agency for Health and Food Safety, and together with Ana Pires da Silva from INRAe, Portugal, we are leading this conversation. My AGES colleague, 𝐂𝐨𝐧𝐬𝐭𝐮𝐵 will be there throughout the whole conversation and can help you with any technical aspects or technical questions that you may have. So please feel free to always send a message to Catherine on the chat. To keep our conversation flow well, please remember to keep your microphones muted when you're not speaking. And if you're having a slower internet, it might also be good to keep your camera off. And feel free to ask questions through the chat all the time. We will be picking them up from the chat. And after the individual talks, there will also be a short time for questions for that particular talk. Many of you may have already been on several conversations. However, I still would like to say a couple of words about the partnership. So Agroecology Partnership is a European partnership on accelerating farming systems transition through agroecology living labs and research infrastructures. It's a collaborative project with 72 partners representing all the member states, also associated countries and third countries. So a big undertaking on a European level. These conversations are one of the first steps that we are taking to enhance agricultural knowledge and innovation systems, the AKIS, for agroecological transition. And these conversations are there to foster connections, enable discussions across and among living labs and research infrastructures and their actors throughout Europe, as well as beyond Europe. These conversations are happening monthly, so usually the last Wednesday of the month at 1 o'clock Central European time, we sit together and dive into one of the important topics from the partnership. And in each conversation, we have a talk from the partnership and one representing an external view so that we can foster this discussion. Today, we have two presentations. The first one will be from the partnership and is prepared by Ileana Iocola from Council for Agricultural Research and Economics, CREA, Italy, and Alejandra Jimenez from French National Institute for Research on Agriculture, Food and Environment, INRAe. Ileana will introduce you to the partnership's conceptual framework for agroecology monitoring. And as a second speaker, we have Nicola Randall from Harper Adams University from UK. And she will give us insights in evidence synthesis for advancing agroecological decision-making. And first, we will listen to the individual talks. And once the talks are finished, we will have half an hour for discussion where you can give questions to both of the speakers. And you're also very welcome to come with comments on the topic or your additional inputs. The conversation will be recorded. I think you have all clicked OK, but if you have some objections, you can say it now. Don't hear any objections for recording. So the recording will also be available later on if someone wants to have a look at the conversation, or if you want to get back to a particular part of the conversation, it will be available for you. And without a further ado, I would now like to move to the first talk. So Ileana, you're welcome. The floor is yours.
Hi to everyone. I will share my screen. Okay, I hope you can see my presentation in mode version. First of all, I want to thank you for this opportunity and for the organization of this conversation. I will present to you some of the activities that we are carrying out in the work package 5 of the partnership, and specifically in the task 5.2 that is led by CREA and INRAe, with the contribution of the partners that you can see in this slide. One of the aim of the work package 5 is to develop a framework to answer to one of the operative objectives of the partnership, that is to set up a framework to monitor agroecological transition and its performances and impacts across different contexts and scales in Europe, starting from the very local, so the farm level, until the European level. In the work package 5, we are following the steps proposed by 𝐵𝐸𝐴𝐻 framework, that is a framework to design an holistic assessment of a system. And specifically in our task, we are the aim is to develop the conceptualization of this framework, and we are implementing specifically the step 4 and 5, so with the choose of the theoretical foundation of the framework and identification of what is relevant to measure. The idea is to capitalize what is already reported in literature, and so the frameworks and tools that are already available to monitor agroecology and its transition, but also to address some gaps that are reported in the literature. And we have understood that there is a few attention to the wide and broad scales of analysis, such as the national and European level. And also some authors report that the understanding of the dynamic process of transition in the times is very powerful, useful to understand better the transition. But these dynamic processes are taken into account by few frameworks and tools. And in our conceptual framework, we want to address these challenges and gaps. So we have decided to include also in our conceptualization the dynamic process, for sure also the wide scales of the analysis. In order to have a comprehensive insight of the system that we want to monitor, we have decided to include also the 5 components of change that are reported in a framework proposed by Biovision, and the same components of change are also reported in a report written by IPES Food with the contribution of the same 𝐂𝐨𝐧𝐜𝐞𝐩𝐭𝐮𝐚𝐥. The 5 components that we are taking into account are the change in production practices, the change in the economic relationship, change in societal values and engagement, the change in political and institutional framework condition, and the change in knowledge, research, and education. With the integration and the consideration of all these components, we are sure to capture the whole complexity of the agroecological transition, going behind the change of the production practices that are usually considered by the available tools and framework. Within these 5 components of change, we have identified 3 different types of monitoring. The first one is the monitoring related to the dynamic processes of transition, and this is mainly based on the theory of change. It can be used to monitor, to understand how the actors interact and implement the principle in the times. Then there is the second type of monitoring that is used for the characterization of degree of agroecological integration, and that is based mainly on the implementation of the principles of agroecology. And this type of monitoring can be used to evaluate which principles are implemented and the extent of implementation of these principles. And then we have the monitoring of the effect given by the implementation of these principles on the sustainability, performance, and impacts. And so this is based on the sustainability theory and so on the multidimensional of sustainability, but also it addresses some elements that come from the food system conceptualization. So the idea is starting from the implementation of the activities and action carrying out by the actors. With this, the implementation of this activity, we have the implementation of the principles, and through the implementation of the principle, so with the implementation of agroecology, we are able to move the system toward the sustainability. In our conceptualization, we are also taking into account the different spatial and temporal scales of the analysis, but also the different focuses of the application. A focus of application is a specific area where the framework is applied, and it helps us also to define better the boundary of the system that we want to monitor, and also to define what have to be monitored. And we are identifying these focuses of application according to the relevance of agroecology, but also according to the needs of the partnership. We are also trying to locate the different focus of application that could be, for example, the monitoring of a farm, monitoring of a living lab, a network of a living lab, and so on, according to the different spatial scales of the analysis. But also we are trying to understand what types of monitoring have to be addressed within each focus of application. Considering the spatial scales of the analysis, we have so far included 5 different spatial scales that go from the very local to address, for example, the farm level, to local to address the landscape and the territory, and then we have the region, the country, and in the European level. Considering the temporal scales of the analysis that we are including in our conceptualization, we have so far identified 3 different temporal scales that are the short-term effect, the medium-term effect, and the long impact. And the dynamic processes and the monitoring related to the performance and impacts are able to cover and to address all these 3 different temporal scales, while the agroecological characterization is more like a snapshot of the system in a specific time, and so it will be used more for a diachronical analysis. In the dynamic processes of transition, the idea, this is strongly led by the INRAe team, and the idea is to identify a methodology to monitor and to measure the transition itself through the reconfiguration and implementation of the principles along the times. The process starts from an entry point, that is the stage of initial unsatisfactory situation, where the actors recognize that a change is needed. This is followed by the transitory stage with the implementation of some of the agroecological principles, and in this case, different possible pathways are implemented, are explored until one path can emerge. And this is the new start, the new entry point with where the actors implement additional principles, and so the process can restart. In this part of dynamic processes, we have so far also identified the presence of factors that are called transformative accelerators that the actors can use to foster the transition. In the monitoring related to the characterization of a degree of agroecological integration, we have identified tools and frameworks that are already available in the literature to do this job. And now we are analyzing these tools and the criteria that are in these tools to evaluate the extent of implementation of the principles. We are linking these criteria and the principles to the 5 components of change. And as you know, these principles are also related to the 5 levels of agri-food system transformation proposed by 𝐂𝐨𝐧𝐜𝐞𝐩𝐭𝐮𝐚𝐥. The idea is also we're exploring the possibility to combine this analysis with other frameworks that address and identify the degree of transformative potential of the agroecological approaches that are implemented in the system. This is the third monitoring that is related to the sustainability, performance, and impacts. Also in this case, we have identified a list of tools that are used to address the multidimensionality of sustainability, and we have analyzed these tools, and we have so far identified a list of topics and issues that are used to evaluate the sustainability. We have linked these topics also to the different dimensions of sustainability and the components of change, and we are now understanding the relevance of these topics according to the scales of analysis and different focuses of application. For this, we have prepared a survey. This is the link of the survey. Then I will put this link in the chat after this presentation. That is open to everyone involved in agroecology monitoring. So it's open to people that are within, but also outside the partnership. We strongly recommend to you to answer to this, to participate to this survey, and we will really appreciate your contribution and your feedback. What are the next steps? For sure, we have to engage the stakeholders in multiple levels to better redefine the elements that we are including in our conceptualization. The idea is also to prepare a map with the connections among the different elements of the framework across also the different scales. And we have to finalize the conceptual framework by the end of this year with the release of the deliverable that will be public in January of 2027. Then there will be the operativization of this framework that will be done by the following tasks of the work package 5 with the identification of tools and indicators. So thank you for your attention, and if you have any questions, I'm here to answer you.
Thank you very much, Ileana. We have time for one short question.
We don't have any questions in the chat so far, but Ileana, can you just tell me who could be the leader of this monitoring process in each member state? like a public entity, private, or do you think it's easy to transfer all this information, all this knowledge?
Yeah, the idea is also to engage in this monitoring activity the member states that are participating in the partnership itself. And so according also to the part of the framework that have to be monitored, we have different leaders of the monitoring. But anyway, according to the scales of the analysis and to the issue of the monitoring, you have different factors. And for sure, at the country level, the idea is to engage also in this analysis the member states that are a part of the partnership itself. But there are also the living labs, the other focuses application that could be led by different stakeholders and actors. So according to the focus of application, we have different leaders of this monitor. And for the monitoring, for sure, we can use data that are from the partnership, from the projects coming from the partnership, but also we need, especially at national and European level, data that are outside from the partnership. And for this, we have also to engage in this analysis, in this conceptualization, people that detect the data.
Thank you very much, Ileana. I also see in the chat that the link is being asked. Ileana will send it in the chat, and the QR code will also come at the end. Ileana will stay with us, so after the second talk, you will also be able to get Ileana back to the discussion. Thank you so much. We will now move to our second speaker, to Nicola Randall from Harper Adams University. Nicola, you're welcome. The floor is yours. You are still muted, Nicola.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry about that. I've been having some problems with Zoom. So Catherine's actually going to share my slides. So thanks, Catherine. So yeah, I'm Nicola Randall. I work at Harper Adams University, where I'm a professor of evidence-based agriculture and agroecology. And I'm going to talk to you about evidence synthesis, which is a very different type of tool. So thinking about bringing together existing research evidence to either inform your research or to inform decision-making. So if I could have the next slide, please. So evidence synthesis. So why are we interested in evidence synthesis? What we're really looking at doing is trying to bring together existing research and reevaluate that research. So we combine and analyze data from different studies to find out what's known about a research question. And you can see at the bottom of this slide here, there's a diagram which shows how evidence synthesis might work into different parts of decision-making cycles. So in this case, a policy-making cycle. Okay. So these are some of the reasons you might use an evidence synthesis. You might use them to inform decisions or guidance, reduce uncertainty. They can be used to quantify effects. So if you imagine you have a lot of different research studies, they might all have slightly different contexts. They might all present slightly different findings, and evidence synthesis can bring those together. But also what can be really useful in studies such as yours, these big programs, is identifying knowledge gaps. And of course, they're very transparent and they're designed to be reproducible as well. So you can build on the findings. Okay. So you'll all be familiar with traditional reviews. We we bring together research and we summarise it. However, traditional reviews can be subject to some issues. So they can be subject to, for example, to selection bias, publication bias. They're not always transparent, and they might have other types of inherent biases within them. So when we're talking about a systematic review or a formal evidence synthesis, we're trying to minimise some of those biases, but also maximise comprehensiveness of our findings. So we might weight studies. And what I'm going to do is go through some examples of how we might do that. So if I could have the next slide, please. So just before I do that, just very quickly, different types of evidence reviews that you might hear being spoken about. So traditional literature review we've mentioned, but you might have a systematic review. Probably a lot of you have heard of that. That's where you identify, appraise and synthesize research evidence. Or you might have a systematic map, which provides you with a map of the current state of research. That's often very useful at the beginning of a project. Hi, I dropped out there. Can you hear me again?
We can hear you again.
Okay, great. So hopefully you heard about systematic maps. So a meta-analysis is the statistical analysis of bringing together the evidence from lots of studies. And of course, there's lots of different versions of these different things. So rapid evidence reviews, for example, do them in a much more quick way. So if I could have the next slide, please. So just to illustrate what I was saying about different studies finding different things, you could have multiple studies on one topic, but they all come out with different conclusions. And I love this image because I think it illustrates that sort of thing very well. But what I want to do is actually build up an evidence review for those of you that aren't familiar with it. So if I could have the next slide. So if we're collating evidence, so let's just suppose we want to know what impact mob grazing, for example, has on soil biodiversity. We can collect different studies and we can show whether they have either a positive effect or a negative effect on soil biodiversity, for example. So we might plot an individual study and we can put a line of no effect down the middle. And if I could have the next one. And you can see here, there's another one that's on the negative side. This one's smaller because we can weight studies. So larger studies with more samples have a greater impact on the overall analysis. Okay. Could I have the next slide? And we can add confidence intervals onto that. So you can see that the smallest study down on the bottom there, the confidence intervals cross the line of no effect. So that would mean there's actually no statistically significant difference of that study. Whereas the larger study where it doesn't cross the line of no effect does have a statistical, a significant impact on the overall findings. So if we plot all of our studies, you might end up with something like this, where some will be one side of the line of no effect, some might be the other, some might cross it. Okay. And as I said before, you could sort of overlay that over the picture. They're all finding different things. So if I could have the next one. But ultimately, we want to find out the overall effect. So we have the diamond at the bottom, which reanalyzes brings together all the data from all those studies and combines the findings. And in this case, we can see that overall, although some of the studies have a positive effect, some of them have a negative effect, overall, the combined findings, that meta-analysis shows that there is a positive effect on soil biodiversity. So for those of you that have used meta-analyses, this is how they're built up. The weight of studies influences that. So if that very large study was actually a smaller study, or it was was much more variable, it may be that overall you find there is no overall effect of those combined studies. So this is much better than vote counting, just adding up studies and saying 10 have a positive effect and 6 have a negative effect. Okay, if I could have the next slide. So why is this important? Well, this is a health example, but this shows how a cumulative meta-analysis, so if lots of studies had been put together over the time they'd been put together, what this shows was that in 1959, right at the top there was a first randomized control of this particular drug treatment. But if you'd carried out a meta-analysis in 1973 of all the existing studies, we would already know at that point that that drug worked. However, because no meta-analysis was carried out, that drug, lots more studies carried on, and it was 1988 by the time the drug was approved. So a meta-analysis could have shown us that that drug worked at a much earlier date. If we could move on. So yeah, that's basically what I said. The drug could have been approved 15 years earlier and saved carrying out 62 more trials on all those additional people. Okay, so if we could move on, and oh yeah, one last thing, bias is also important. So a meta-analysis has a very structured way of analysing the data, but not always in collecting the data. So the difference between a meta-analysis and a systematic review is a systematic review also is designed to reduce bias in how you collect the information that goes into that meta-analysis. So making sure you, for example, include grey literature in your primary research studies to avoid publication bias. We know that positive studies are more likely to be published. So what do you end up with? You might end up with a meta-analysis, which we've just looked at, or you might end up, if you're doing a systematic map, you might end up with a geographical map of studies. You might also end up with something like a searchable database of different findings. And if we could move on. So just very quickly, just putting this into context for agroecology, this here shows an example of a traditional review looking at some regenerative agriculture practices where green is a positive impact, red is a negative impact, and orange is neutral or mixed. And what we see indicated here is that cover crops tend to have more positive impacts, although not for greenhouse gas emissions, whereas tillage is much more variable. But if we look at the next slide, what we can see is actually there appears to be very little or unresolved research on some of those specific interventions and outcomes. Cover crops, there appears to be a lot more research. It appears to be more well established. And if we could move on. Could we have the next slide? So we might also pick out patterns over time. Oh, so I think those two slides came up together, but that doesn't matter because basically what this tells us is that research appears to show that agroecological impacts seen if we're looking at impacts on yield, because one of the concerns in moving to an agroecological approach from existing research indicates that the yield drops appear to stabilize over time. And if we could look at the next slide, the issue with that work is that was a traditional literature review, so we don't know how comprehensive it is or whether it's unbiased. We can look at meta-analyses, which give us a different additional confidence. So we can see here, this is a meta-analysis that's looking at various diversification practices. And again, what it is, it's actually bringing together lots of different meta-analyses, this particular study. And overall, these appear to show that for certain interventions, so fertility, soil fertility, for example, nutrient cycling, we have a pretty good impact. Yield impacts, again, look much more variable. And if we can move on. So what we might want to do is to actually look at some of those in detail to get it, or we might want to get a better picture. So this, at the moment, one of the things we're doing is building on this evidence review and on these meta-analyses to try and look at some specific interventions on yield and on carbon emissions. It's still going on at the moment, but we're mapping the studies to see what sort of studies there are taking place that are of relevance to Europe. So you can see this just shows the map of the studies. You can see that we have quite a comprehensive database of what those studies are finding. And then if we want to, we can then go on and for a subsection of that, carry out another meta-analysis. So if I could move on. And does it matter? Well, this is some of the impact we've had from evidence reviews. And yes, they do change policy. So if you look at the notes here, up in the top left corner, you can see this is from a policy organisation saying that that reviews have demonstrated that certain interventions are more effective than others. And they've actually changed their policies as a result of that. And if we could have the last slide. Finally, if you're interested in evidence synthesis in the agri-food sector, we do have an EU network now, a cost-funded network for the next 4 years, which is the Network for Evidence Synthesis in the agri-food sector. It's open for anybody to join if you want to join working groups, and we'll have various events and trainings, etc. running. So yeah, very quick overview. A little bit difficult not having slides as well, my own slides, but hopefully that's given you an overview of how evidence synthesis might help you and how you might be able to join. You can see the 5 working groups for the network there, but hopefully we can discuss it more in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicola. This was a very good talk on evidence synthesis. Do we have a question from the audience directly? There is one question from Ronald Alvaro Faratobar. He is wondering if you could elaborate how you prevent biases, especially in regard to confirmation bias.
Yeah, sure. So there's lots of different ways in which we can reduce bias, and it's really through using that very structured methodology. So with a systematic review or a systematic map, for example, you would prepare a method beforehand, and then you stick to that method. But one of the things you would do, you would include your grey literature, which might get rid of publication bias. But also by doing that method beforehand, putting that method out helps reduce other biases such as confirmation bias. So in a traditional literature review, you might just pick the studies that agree with what you think. Whereas if you've created your methodology beforehand and you've said exactly what interventions you're going to include, what outcomes you're going to include, what comparators you might include, what populations you might include, for example, you then get rid of that confirmation bias because you treat every single study the same. So we can talk about that a bit more if you're interested.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
I would now also like to open the floor for questions for both of the speakers. So my colleague Anna will also be looking for questions on the chat. And please feel free to just raise your hand and ask for your time to speak. You are all very welcome to put up your camera, raise your hand, and give your comments. And in case the chat is your preferred way, that's also perfectly fine. I think we can still take one question from the chat to to Nicola. Cristina Chaminade is asking how you weigh the studies. You mentioned the number of cases, but what about geographical diversity or scientific impact?
Yeah, thanks, Christina. Really useful question. Studies can be weighted in a number of different ways. So one would be the size of the sample sizes, for example, is one way in which it's quite easy to weight studies. So larger studies would generally have a higher weight than lower studies, but you may also use other weightings that you might think relevant to your question. So for example, you talk about geographical diversity. Let's suppose we're in a temperate region. You may completely disregard, or you may weight in a different way studies that are perhaps from a slightly different climate zone, for example. So you make those decisions up front, basically, within your review team. Scientific impact shouldn't matter because you're treating the study as an individual study, not how many I don't know how many times it's been cited or whatever, because you're looking at the methods. So if something's had robust methods, it might be weighted more highly than something that hasn't, or the ones that haven't might not be included at all.
Thank you. There's one hand up from Erika Angarita.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you oh my God, sorry. The presenter, I'm sorry, oh, I missed the name. Nicola, sorry. Yeah, I'm just, I would like to know if you have some tips and some recommendations to avoid falling into these rabbit holes when you are in the searching process for making these different approaches of reviewing. Especially for me, it's important to know from your experience, like how to stop searching. How do you get to that point? Especially if you're also working with other people together, you know? So
yeah, so again, it's really making sure that you prepare that protocol, that methodology properly. And as part of that, we would carry out scoping searches. And if we know that the topic's going to be too big, we might focus the question a little more, for example, or you might say, well, you know, in this case, there's so much research, we're only going to take the top X number of studies or something like that. It depends on your question and what the important things are, how you make those decisions. But the most important thing is to scope it out first so you can try to make those decisions up front if you possibly can and write them into your methods.
okay, thank you. And this tips for stop searching, and how do you know that you have to stop searching?
Yeah, well, again, we would carry out what we call scoping searches first. So we would decide, you know, we'd look at our search terms and sort out our search terms very early on. So what terms are you going to use to find the studies? Are they correct? What's the ratio of studies that you find compared to studies that are suitable to be included? And can you focus your searches more appropriately? If you know you're going to get 100,000 studies, you might say, well, actually, we can only search through the first 50,000 or something, or the first 10,000. So you might have to make that decision, but you can try to focus your search terms appropriately initially, which can help with some of those issues. Yeah, without seeing the individual one.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. There has also been a couple of questions for Ileana. Ileana, would you like to say something more about the questionnaire, how to find it? The link is now on the chat, and maybe a bit on the deadlines.
Yeah, exactly. I put the link in the chat, and the deadline is the end of April, so you have more or less 1 month to answer. I'm aware that also the survey is very long. Sounds that it takes more or less 35-40 minutes to fill in. because it is organized in the 5 components of change, and within each component you will see the different topics and the relevance according to the scales of the analysis and focuses of the application. So it takes time, but we will really appreciate your feedbacks and contribution. And in the survey, you will find the topics that are that we have identified through the literature and through the revision of the frameworks and tools that are related to sustainability, not only on agroecology, as I have also answered to one of the questions in the chat, because the idea was to assess also the performance and impact, even if given by the agroecology implementation, in general, on the different components and dimension aspect of the sustainability, and also to identify topics for the analysis and identification of a potential trade-off. And so we have not only taken into account tools that are strictly related to the agroecology, but also we have decided to include additional tools to address the sustainabilities and also the trade-off that are included in these tools. And also in the survey, there is the possibility to provide feedbacks on additional topics and issues that are not covered in these tools. And so your answers are also relevant for this. For example, analyzing these tools, I have also understood that there is no topics so far that address the consumer's behavior, for example. And so if you looking at the survey and issues that we have identified through the analysis of these tools, please feel free also to suggest additional topics that are not addressed so far.
Thank you, Ileana. Anna, is there something in the chat that we have missed?
No. Sorry, no, there is something, another issue. Because many people are asking for more information. We have the release of the deliverable by the January of 2027, so next year. We have so far released an additional deliverable, but we have understood where and when we will release this deliverable, and if this this additional deliverable will be also available in the partnership, in the website of the partnership. So far we haven't any written format that we can share, but for sure I can add an additional slide in the presentation where I can put all the references that we have used for the identification of the different components and elements that we have so far identified in our framework. And I think that also the full references, scientific reference, could help also to understand better how our work.
Thank you very much. Are there some comments, questions from the audience? You still have chance to ask both Ileana and Nicola.
Nicola, can you tell me, do you think the AI tools can help the meta-analysis? Do you think it makes sense?
The short answer is yes. That's one of the things that's developing very fast at the moment, is looking at how AI can be used to support evidence synthesis and making it more efficient in various different ways. So again, in our EU network, that's one of the things we're looking at, is new technologies I've just put the link in the chat because there are a couple of very specific questions. So if people do want training, there will be training delivered, but also, you know, hackathons to look at these new methodologies as well. And it's completely free if you're part of, you know, if you free for people that might want to join, because the cost pay for attendance for people. So
okay, thank you. I think all the questions are answered. I think so. I don't see any hands raised at this moment.
Yeah, so Nicola, so the participation in the cost network, so it's possible for all European countries. So are the events online or in physical?
Yeah, so it varies. So we've got our first full event actually next week, which will be a combination of a hybrid and a face-to-face event, but the training course that's on next week is actually face-to-face only. But there'll be a variety of different events that people can join, and you don't have to be actually a member of a European organisation, but you may not be eligible for reimbursement and for travel and subsistence if you're not. So it does depend which country people are based in.
Thank you. And how many, for your training events, how much space is there usually?
So again, I think it will vary. This one we were going to have it to 20, but we've actually gone up. We've decided to go up to a maximum of 40, and we've still got a few spaces left, but obviously it's very short notice now. So, but I think it will vary according to the actual training event. So that one's an overview of evidence synthesis, whereas if it's much more specific, for example, very technical in meta-analysis, then they might be smaller groups. But also there'll be online events as well, which obviously can cater for a lot more people.
Thank you so much. Maybe a question for both of you, like we are talking about evidence synthesis and at the same time monitoring of ongoing transition. How do you see that the monitoring and evidence synthesis work together? How can they support one another?
I can answer that. I think they work very well together, because if we're looking at evidence syntheses, as I said right at the beginning, it could be for all different stages. So it might be looking at a particular intervention, but if you're monitoring to see what's happening from sort of one stage to another, if there's other research elements or other studies, they don't have to be scientific studies, they could be social science studies that have looked at people at different stages, then that can be integrated into evidence syntheses as well. So I think evidence syntheses can inform monitoring, for example. So you might inform your questions for your primary research, but also they can bring together outcomes of those monitoring studies. I don't know.
Yeah, me too. I think that they are very, very strongly connected. In fact, one of the outcomes of the monitoring is to provide scientific evidence for a policymaker and different actors that are engaged in the transition processes to support the decision making. And so evidence coming from the monitorings are very, very useful. And the monitoring, it is the way also to provide this evidence. So they are strictly connected.
Thank you both. Anna, do you still have some questions that you want to discuss with the speakers?
No, I don't. And I'm looking at the chat and there is no questions, no more questions.
I see a lot of thank yous for both of the speakers. Thank you very, very much for sharing your knowledge, sharing your input to the topic that is very, very valuable. Catherine, we can maybe take the next slide. Thank you. So with this QR code, you will also go directly to the survey from Work Package 5 from the partnership. It would be very, very valuable if you could take about half an hour to fill in the questionnaire. This will really enhance the conceptual framework that will come from the partnership. I would also like to remind you of the next conversation. It will be our 10th conversation, end of April. And in the next two conversations, we will also go into the reviews that are being done from our Work Package 7. Next one will be a critical review on transition, agroecological transition and co-creation in it. So Nicola, maybe the next two conversations will also be very interesting for you. If you have any comments, questions about the conversations, you have a burning idea that you would like to bring into the conversations, please do keep in contact with us. If you have a colleague who wants to be on our email list, or you want to be on the email list and are not yet there, do let us know. We would be very happy to have you in. And we will not send you way too many emails. We will send an email once a month to invite for the conversation about 7 to 10 days before the conversation is happening. I would like to thank the speakers once again. Thank you so much for taking the time and the whole Task 7.1 team for the organization. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Catherine, who's been taking care of the technical sides. And looking forward to see you again end of April. Have a wonderful afternoon.